To start off, I would like to ask you, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Oh, of course. So my name is Catherine Corrigan, and I am currently the president and chief executive officer of a company called Exponent. Exponent is an engineering and scientific consulting firm with offices around the United States and also in Asia and in Europe. And we consult in many different disciplines of engineering on a variety of different issues that our clients face across many different industries, including transportation, chemicals, consumer products and electronics, utilities, and many different sectors of the economy.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. And the first question will be, what causes you going to engineering and taking the job that you have today?
Yeah, I had many influences as I was growing up, and I really trace the fact that I am an engineer today back to my very early days. My father is an engineer. He's been retired for many years now, but he had a PhD in electrical engineering from Cornell, and he worked at Bell Labs for his entire career. And so I grew up in a family, I was very fortunate to be exposed to a parent who was an engineer. And actually, as I reflect back, my mother was also very much an influence. She had majored in psychology originally when she was in college, and like many women of her generation, she stopped working when she had my older sister and me, but she decided when I was probably in middle school that she wanted to go back to school, and she ended up getting her degree in computer science when she did that. And so this was back in the day where you used assembly language and you had to have punch cards that you were feeding into a mainframe. This is back in the early 80s. But I realize as I reflect back, my mother was my first woman in STEM role model. And as I reflect back, I think that both she and my father were very much an influence on me. My sister went into engineering as well. And so it seemed a very natural kind of fit for me to do that. And I knew that I was interested in engineering, but I also knew that I was interested in biology. And I was maybe interested in medicine, but I really didn't want to treat patients. And so it turned out that bioengineering was just the sort of the perfect thing for me, because I could think about the human body and biological systems like an engineer. And I thought that was really neat. And so that was really what drew me into engineering.
You mentioned about bioengineering. What were bioengineering like? What were your school days like?
So I did do my undergraduate degree in bioengineering, and that was at the University of Pennsylvania. And so it was a combination of courses where, we started really with the fundamentals of engineering. So, you have to start with math and calculus, a lot of physics, a lot of chemistry, some biology, and then I decided that they wanted us to have a minor emphasis program in one of the more traditional areas of engineering. Back then, bioengineering was pretty novel back in the 80s. Now it's sort of more well-developed in terms of the programs, but my emphasis area was in mechanics. And so I took courses that were related to mechanical engineering. So ultimately, really what I wanted to understand, what I was really curious about, is how injury occurs to people in the human body. We have bones break, right? And you can think about those bones breaking in the way that an engineer would analyze the way a building might collapse, or a piece of metal might break, where if you want to be able to protect against injury, then you need to understand how injuries happen. And so that was what led me into wanting to take the kinds of courses that were around the mechanics area, failure analysis and how things fail, so that I could apply that to the human body and understand not only how injuries happen, but also how to prevent injuries. If you want to invent a helmet, that can prevent a brain injury or a skull fracture, you have to really understand well how much force the human brain can tolerate, when there's a head impact, so that you can design an effective protective system. So this was an area that really fascinated me and was the kind of thing that I was pursuing when I got into my undergraduate, and then even further when I was in graduate school.
So have you been involved in like some type of projects related to that? Could you share one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my, I went through my undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, and then I knew I wanted to go on to graduate school. I didn't realize at the time that I would end up getting a PhD. I was pursuing, I actually applied to the mechanical engineering department at MIT, and when they saw my personal statements, the kinds of work that I talked about wanting to do related to injury, they said, we really think that you would be a good fit for a joint program that MIT had with the Harvard Medical School. So it was sort of the best of both worlds, training engineers who could work at the interface of engineering and medicine. And so I went into that program. I did end up getting a PhD, and I did my research in the area of bone mechanics. And so when I started my professional career, after my graduate school was finished, I started doing consulting work, actually advising clients, for example, in the automotive industry, when their vehicles had crashes and people were injured in those crashes. I would be called in to analyze that crash and really understand exactly how that person was injured in that crash. And so I would use physical evidence. I would inspect the vehicle. I would look at the X-ray films and the MRI scans and the CAT scans of the person's injuries, and basically sort of reconstruct how that person was injured, trying to figure out, were they wearing their seatbelt or not, trying to figure out if the airbag worked properly or not, trying to figure out how the vehicle deformation might have affected the injury. So lots of different questions that arose in the context of those crashes. I was able to develop a career at Exponent, consulting with clients to understand how injuries happen in the real world because of the expertise I had gleaned in biomechanical engineering.
This is really interesting. Actually, I never thought of like a career in engineering like that before, actually.
Yeah, well, this is a lot of the work that Exponent does, that is very much about investigating things that have happened. So if a bridge has collapsed, or a building has collapsed, or if there's been an explosion that has occurred, and you need engineers to be able to come in and investigate and understand why those things happened and how they happened and what kinds of physical evidence has been left, so that we can come back and we can not only understand what happened, but then we can learn from what happened. Failure is a really, really good teacher. You've tried something and you make a mistake and you think to yourself, well, now you know that doing it that way doesn't work, and you're probably not going to make that mistake again. Well, you've learned something, right? And that's the same way with the kind of work that we do at Exponent. We think about not only investigating things that have happened in the past so that we can understand them, but we also work with our clients to sort of implement ways of designing and developing safer products that perform better, that are better for the environment, and things like that. And when things are very complicated, they're heavily regulated. These are times when clients call us for help in the development of their products, so that they can avoid having things happen, where people are injured using their products, or their products don't work right in the field. And we help clients across many different industries in those kinds of things. And often you think about engineers and you think engineers design things.
Yeah.
There are a lot of engineers that design things, and that's a really important aspect of what engineers do. But there's this whole other side of engineering that is about engineering science and engineering analysis. of things that happen, in the world. And so engineering isn't only about designing things. It can be about, all of that science and analyzing those systems.
Shifting gears a little bit. So we know that engineering careers were off limits for women not that long ago. And where even now environment isn't always friendly. So have you ever experienced any like challenges or stereotypes just based on your gender?
Yeah, well, I am dreaming of a day when we can, we as women engineers can walk into a room and not have people be surprised that we're engineers. We haven't gotten there yet. It's a lot better now than it was when I was going through school or when I was your age. I mean, I remember in graduate school, boy, in the mechanical engineering department at MIT, we really had to find each other. There were not many of us as graduate students in that department. I don't know what the percentages were, but it was probably less than 10%, especially when you get up to the PhD level. And so, I've had plenty of times when I've walked into the room and people just think it's so novel and they can't help themselves but sort of comment that, oh, it's the lady engineer, and I just try not to roll my eyes because it's just, it gets old. It gets old very fast, to sort of hear that. But look, there have also been times in my career where I think being a woman actually was an advantage for me. In the consulting business, again, in engineering, women are fairly rare, and clients oftentimes would, I think, appreciate being able to have a woman on the team of experts that were working on a matter, when they want to be able to communicate to the jury in a certain way. And so it's not necessarily a male-female thing, but one thing I think I learned from that is how important it has been for me in my career to not only be a really top-notch engineer from the technical side, but to also really hone my skills around communication and around presenting the work that we do, and around all of the soft skills and the leadership skills that go along with it. So there's going to be lots of technical things that you'll learn as you go to school, and if you major in engineering, and you'll have to work really hard on all of those. But there are these other life skills, around communicating, around being able to inspire folks, how to lead, and how to sort of use those soft skills in collaborating with people, that can really make a difference in how you're perceived and where you're able to go, as an engineer, if you aspire to leadership.
I also wanted to ask, what are some changes do you think, like as a society, that we should embrace in terms of like equity in engineering?
Oh, so you mean there are so many big challenges that we face as a humanity, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many areas that engineers can contribute to. That's one of the things I think that causes a lot of people to go into engineering, because you can have a very concrete impact. You're working with the physical world, and whether you're designing things or you're on sort of the analysis and the science side, you can really have an impact on making the world, a safer place, making the world a more sustainable place. If you think about, I think of an example of things we do at Exponent that help to help clients understand the risk associated with things like extreme weather and wildfires. Wildfires, especially here in California. You live in California. How devastating wildfires can be. And so one of the things that our teams at Exponent are doing is helping our utility clients really understand the risks that are associated with their electrical infrastructure. They don't want their transmission infrastructure to cause wildfires. And so, there are some very sophisticated data analytics techniques and engineering techniques that we're using to help them understand their risk, to help them prioritize which parts of their infrastructure they need to work on or replace first, so that they, we're trying to predict when they're going to fail and under what circumstances. How strong does the wind have to be in order to knock down a particular transmission line and have a risk of a fire? So this is just one example of how we as engineers can help in trying to mitigate the effects of climate change in the world. You can think of engineering also. Another one I think of is looking at human health and the health of the population. And this has been particularly relevant in the time of COVID-19 that we've all been dealing with for the last two plus years. Mm-hmm. And the miracle of the vaccines that we have and all of the engineering that had to go into developing the manufacturing techniques for that vaccine, in developing some of the diagnostic testing protocols that we can use to test for COVID-19, comes down to not only engineering, right? The key is that you have to have the engineers collaborating with the physicians and collaborating with the policy makers and the lawmakers, right? This concept of collaboration and interdisciplinary collaboration, you've got to be able to have diverse perspectives coming in on the problem if you really want to solve it. So, whatever sort of big problem we choose, I think my message would be that, you are going to have engineers having an impact, but you need to have that collaborative sort of approach where you bring those different perspectives to bear if you really want to have new ideas that can create forward progress.
Final notes. Do you have any more thoughts and that you think might be helpful to girls like me in the future?
Yeah, I do. And, there's lots of advice that I could give, but I think the one thing that I would focus on in our last minute is to have confidence in yourself. You need to be ready when the opportunities come. But you also, we can all tend to get in the room and maybe feel like, boy, there are so many smart people in this room, and I'm not sure if I should speak up, and what if I say something that isn't right? And we have sort of this, some of us suffer from a lack of confidence in that sort of setting, and this is true of women and of men, right? And I've suffered from that my entire career. And my advice really is that you should speak up. You'll spend far more time, regretting the times you didn't speak up than you will the times that you did. And so, I would encourage you to build your confidence and to speak up in those settings and really contribute because what you have to say is important.
Thank you so much for your advice, and thank you so much for sharing today. And I'm sure this conversation will provide a lot of insights to other engineering girls or people watching this interview as well.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been my pleasure.